Hello and welcome to Comic Boom, the comics and education podcast. If you're interested in hearing more about the crossover between comics and education, then this is the podcast for you. My name is Lucy Starbuck-Bradley, and each week I'll be joined by a fellow educator, an academic, a librarian or a creator of comics to discuss their journey into comics and provide some inspiration to influence your practice. And hopefully shine some light on some titles that you can bring into your libraries, classrooms, and hopefully onto your bookshelves at home too. This episode of Comic Boom is sponsored by ALCS, the Authors Licensing and Collecting Society. And today I am joined by Lida Tsene. Lida is passionate about communication. She holds a degree in communication, media and culture and a PhD in social media and social responsibility. She's been teaching communication since 2010 and working in the field for more than 10 years. She's head of PR, art and educational programming at comicboompodcast Athens. She joins us from Greece today, from Athens. She is the founder of the Athens Comics Library, managing co-director of the Digital Comics Museum, organiser and curator of several events, exhibitions, conferences and workshops. And she's also a researcher and teacher across several different universities and courses at master's level. She's participated in conferences internationally on media, digital media, entrepreneurship, storytelling, so many different things. Just reading that it makes me wonder what I've been doing in my life. How she's got so much knowledge and wealth of expertise, and it was great to be able to speak to her today. One of those things where I really feel from this episode it's really the tip of the iceberg of Lida's knowledge, but it was great to be able to dip into that today. So absolutely delighted to be joined by Lida today to give us a little bit of an intro into the work that she's been doing in Greece. Here's what Lida had to say. Hello, Lida. Welcome to Comic Boom.
Hi, Lucy. Thank you so much for having me today.
Oh, it's really exciting to have someone in Greece, live from Greece, to talk to us a little bit about comics and the comic scene there in Athens. I'm really excited to hear what you've got to say. Start off, can you please tell us a little bit about your journey as a comics reader? So where did the interest in comics as a reader start for you?
Well, that's an interesting question, and it's very well connected with how comics evolved in Greece, because when I was growing up back in the 80s, we had a limited access to certain comics like Disney comics or the French Belgian comics like Tsene, Lucky Luke, and then some Italian comics as well. So not much of a variety of choices. And I remember reading some of those Italian comics that were inside a magazine that my brother used to read. And I found it quite interesting. But my actual interest in comics came a little bit later when I discovered the more adult comics were printed here in Greece in a magazine called Vavel. So Vavel was somehow our Trojan horse that sneaked the love of comics to not only to me, but to most of the people of my generation.
That's fascinating. So these were they comic strips or longer form stories within the magazine?
Well, it had both. Again, mostly based on the Italian comic scene, but also, some of the underground American comics. So it was like an apocalypse. I mean, because we were like very much used to read the comics that were not supposed to be addressed to adults, but mostly to children. So, finding out that there is a variety of types, of styles, of different stories that could be told in that fascinating way of the graphic storytelling, really, it really blew our minds away. It was really, as I said earlier, an apocalypse, not only for me, but for many people of my generation here in Greece.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was at a conference this weekend and I was running a session about comics, and just being able to show people, I think there's still a lack of knowledge about just how broad comics are. And I was just showing somebody some graphic novels written by women about sort of graphic medicine or personal memoir comics, and just really these kind of really beautiful, slow-paced, in-depth comics, and they'd never seen anything like that before. It was really an eye-opening moment. I could see it was an eye-opening moment for them, that they were like, oh, I hadn't realized what comics could be outside of the kind of classic comics for children or the kind of superhero genre, which is more prevalent.
This is the main reason why, we started the festival and the library, because in Greece, it's the same situation. I mean, we're used either to read, the more children-friendly comics, and with that I mean the Disney comics, and then superhero comics. So anything else, it wasn't, because now there is a shift. It wasn't so well known here as well.
And what do you think it is that for you, I mean, there's so many different forms of storytelling, there's so many different ways to communicate, but what do you think it is that draws your interest in comics specifically?
Well, I think it's that unique way that comics have to say a story, the combination of images and words, but also all the other elements like the balloons, the lettering. And I also like the pacing when you are reading a comic. And also I find really interesting the transitions between the different scenes, and also the fact that you are somehow allowed to interact with the story while you are reading it. I mean, it's not like you have everything there. You have to, imagine the sounds, the voices of the characters. You have to fill in some gaps between the different panels, and somehow you feel that you participate in the narrative.
Yeah, it's a really active kind of reading experience, isn't it? I completely agree. I would really love to hear a few suggestions of things that you've been reading recently. At the end of the episode, I will ask you to pick one book that's going to be your recommendation. So maybe keep one saved, but what's appealing to you, or artists that you're really interested in?
Right now, I'm reading, and I have it like in front of me as we speak. I'm reading a comic that is mostly a graphic journalism comic by Gianluca Constantini and Francesca Manocci, and it's about Lydia and what is happening there. I'm really interested in that type of storytelling, on how you can document real stories like the journalistic way. So this is a very, very interesting book about, the story of Libya and the war there against Gaddafi, and all the political situation that they were facing. It's a very, very strong book. And I'm also reading, it's in Greek, but I really liked it because it's again something different for the Greek scene. It's not like a typical graphic novel. It's an ethnographic graphic novel. It's about environmental sustainability and the fight of a certain group of people living in a certain area of Greece against some efforts to alter the environmental landscape. So again, it's a very strong comic with a lot of messaging of what is happening right now in terms of how we use the energy, what is happening with the climate, how connected is all that with the politics, how do we understand ecological belonging. So again, I think it's a very interesting story, again based on real people, on interviews, on on-site research by the authors. So yeah, I really like it.
Again, two examples that really show the breadth of what comics can be, and sort of pushing outside of maybe the mainstream understanding of what stories can be told in comic form. I love that. You mentioned a little bit earlier, you hinted at the comic scene in Athens evolving over time. And I'd love to know a little bit more about that. Can you tell us what the comic scene's like in Athens at the moment, how it's grown, and I guess how you've been involved in the growing of that comic scene?
Yeah. So for now, I will say with confidence that we are in a very, very good place as a comics community in Greece. I mean, it's been growing the past years a lot. And this is something that we can tell from how many new Greek comics we have every year, or we can also tell from how many people are coming to the festival, are buying comics, of how many new artists are presenting their work. But also we can also tell this from how the big bookstores have adopted comics, and they have dedicated shelves selling comic books, and not only the well-known, but also, selections from different styles and types, and also from the growth of the events around comics that are not only, the big festivals, but also smaller presentations, or signings, or even educational programming around comics. So imagine that when we started the festival back in 2000, we had like almost 2,000 people attending the festival. And now we have 30,000 people attending the festival. Every year, we have more than 100 artists presenting their new work, which is a very big amount related to the overall economy of Greece. And apart from our festival, there are other festivals happening in Athens and also in other areas around Greece, which also shows, the potential of the community.
That sounds incredible. Sounds like a thriving, really buzzing scene. I know you're also involved in the comics library, so I'm going to go back to the festival side of it a little later on, but can you tell us, I guess I'm really interested in what you think the impact has been of having a comics library specifically, rather than just a section of comics in a larger library, but by bundling it together and giving it its own name, do you think that it has had more impact?
When we started again the library, it was like fulfilling a dream, because we were visiting other countries and we were very jealous seeing other libraries that are dedicated to comics, and we've been very actively involved in designing and facilitating educational workshops using comics and graphic novels. So we really wanted to have like a physical space where, people could come, meet, mingle, talk about the comics they love, but also we wanted to have a space for our educational programming. So that was, the main reason we started the library. But also we wanted to answer to a specific challenge that we have in Greece around the role of libraries in general. We're not, a country that we, cherish and celebrate the role of libraries in the community. Most of the times we use libraries just to go and study. And we wanted also to experiment and see if a thematic library like that could become like a community space for people. And that actually worked, and we managed to create a broader community of people who were engaged and involved with the library, coming from a variety of backgrounds. So we had local populations, we had schools, we also had a lot of refugee and migrant populations coming to the library. But still, I have to admit that it didn't go exactly as we had imagined. And so now we are, in the process of reviving somehow the library and finding new ways to make it attractive and more relevant to what, people are reading or people are seeking from a place like that. So we are somehow trying to create a new strategy around on how we can attract more audiences to the library.
And what sort of role do teachers, you mentioned schools there, what sort of roles do teachers have in that? I'm just going to read a little bit. There was a bit on the website that Athens Comics Library believes in the educational value of comics and therefore designs and implements educational programs for all school levels, as well as seminars for teachers. So I'm really interested, how did your work with teachers develop in the comics library?
Yeah, so, teachers are our second favorite audience. The first one, of course, is children. So when we engage with educators, and when I say educators, I mean people who are, working in the formal and informal education in Greece, it's for us, it's amazing, because we can see immediately the impact of using comics and graphic novels in the classroom can have. So when we first started going to schools, and that was back in 2008, before the library was open, we were accepted with a lot of skepticism and a lot of questions about the role that comics should have in the classroom and the educational process and the learning process. And that was mainly because most of the teachers were not exposed, as you said earlier, to the wider types and styles and genre of comics. They knew the superheroes, so most of the questions were about the questioning was about the violence, and all that typical things that, are highlighting when they're seeing a comic book, and also about the language used and so on and so forth. But 3 or 4 years later, I can say, and we are very proud of that we have managed to get comics into many, many, many schools, because teachers are now seeking of new ways of interacting with the students. And also, the population has changed inside the classrooms. It has become more multicultural. So comics is an amazing tool to break all barriers, linguistic, cultural, even stereotype barriers. And I'm very glad that they can see it this way, and also they can understand that, comics is just another narrative medium, just like, I don't know, cinema or literature, that they can use as an educational tool. So we do have a very good collaboration with teachers. They come to the library, they follow our seminars, they invite us to their schools, they come to the library with their students. We travel a lot also outside Athens to deliver workshops. So yeah, I can say, and again, I will say that we are very proud of achieving this.
That's really incredible. It's amazing to be able to start something and then see that shift and know the impact that you've been able to have. That's brilliant. One of the things that I was really interested to see was that at the Comics Library, there was also sessions for very young children, kind of kindergarten age children, on comics. And there's a real gap in my knowledge, I think, in terms of what that would look like, because I was a primary school teacher, got a really good, clear idea on children 6 to 11 and how they could interact with comics. Got a clear idea on beyond that. In the UK, it would be secondary level education. But that kind of very early age group children, how does that work, that kind of interaction with comics, pre being able to read, but obviously very keen drawers? What did that work look like?
So again, that was something that came to our mind as an idea, because early childhood for us it's really important. And in Greece, we do lack programming outside school that addresses that particular age. And I know that most of the parents today, they are searching for activities, for creative activities for their toddlers. And you can find a lot for children that are aged from 6 and above, but there are not too many things to do for younger audiences. All the things that you can do are very specific, like, messy play, sensory playing, and stuff like that. So we thought that it would be an interesting idea to, experiment and see how this would work. So we work a lot with comics that do not have words, like silent comics. And the interaction mostly is to ask the children to think of, their own story based on the images they see, and then try to put some few words in some balloons. And most of the times they don't put the words, but they draw the words, which is also very, very interesting and cute. And we also work a lot with the Japanese technique of kamishibai, which is like a small paper theater where we have images that are accompanied by an oral storytelling in a very sequential way, just like comics. But instead of reading, you're hearing the story. And then we ask the children again to make something that is related to the story that they have heard. And this something might be like, a paper cut doll that has to do with, it's related to the character, or some other kind of craft. And all that experience seems to, stimulate the younger audiences an interest for reading. So after the sessions, they stay with us, and we have some silent books there and silent comics. So they take the comics with their parents, and they stay there, and they read again the stories, and they see the pictures. And most of them are coming back, asking for more recommendations, more suggestions for their children. And we do that also with schools, not only with parents and their children, but also in a more organized format for kindergarten classes.
That sounds so brilliant. I was smiling away there. I was really learning. It was great. Things that I'd never considered before and ways of approaching it. I love a silent comic. I haven't. What was the Japanese term that you used again?
Kamishibai.
Kamishibai.
It is, you have a portable scene and you put inside images that you can draw. I mean, my colleague draws that images, is not an illustrator, but basic images, and you change the images, and while you're changing those images, you are narrating the story. It's a very, very old way of storytelling in Japan. For the Japanese culture, kamishibai is somehow the preludium to manga.
That is so interesting. I'm going to look into that loads. That's really sparked interest in me. Thank you. Going to move on. That was so fascinating. I kind of want to sit with that knowledge that I've just taken on board for a little while, but I'm going to move on. I'm really interested in the power that you see in comics to convey knowledge, because that's a whole other side of it as well. And I noticed that the titles that you kind of picked out, journalistic titles, ethnographic titles, when you were talking about things that you're reading at the moment. And that obviously it's still in a narrative form, but it is about the transmission of knowledge rather than sort of story for story's sake as well. I just wondered, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, for me and for my team and my colleagues, we see comics as a link to other information, to stimulate self-directed knowledge, because storytelling it's an amazing way of injecting knowledge to people. It works like a Trojan horse, where you can sneak whatever message you want, and that message will go wherever you want it to go. It has the power to explain difficult concepts. It has the power to create empathy. It has the power to help us memorize information. And of course, it has the power to make us feel well, because when we are hearing stories, our body releases oxytocin and dopamine, which are the hormones of love and happiness. And this is also what is happening when you are reading a comic book, and because comics are a form of storytelling. And I will go back and I will say that for us, comics is like a hyperlink. You read a comic book, and then there are lots of questions coming to your mind. I mean, from the background of the character to the places he or she is traveling, or even the books or other references that are made in a comic book. And I will bring here an example of a comic that most of educators use, and I think they use it globally, and that is Bone by Jeff Smith.
Yeah, popular.
Yeah. So the main character of Bone reads Moby Dick in the comic. He's passionate about Moby Dick. He dreams of being Moby Dick and experiencing his adventures. But in the comic, you don't actually read the story of Moby Dick. But the children who are reading Bone, then they have a curiosity to find out who is Moby Dick that their hero is reading. So they go to the library and they ask for Moby Dick. So this is how a comic can convey knowledge. And another thing that we have found out through our workshops is the fact that when you are asking the children to become storytellers, to create their own comics, again, you motivate, you stimulate that curiosity and that self-directed knowledge. Because when you ask someone to create a story, you ask them to do research. So they will do research about, again, the character, the certain period of time that their story is happening, the buildings, the outfits, everything. Mm-hmm. So even if you don't use all that information, the knowledge stays with you. And by that, more creative way, apart from, moving from reading a comic to creating your own comic. We have also, the opportunity to discuss a lot of things with children, not only about the specific themes that they are, writing about, but also on how we create content today, how responsible we are as content creators, what is happening with fake news and disinformation, how do we create our sources. So again, it's a nice way for teaching media literacy to the children. And because, comics is a multimodal medium and we are living in a multimodal world, you can say a lot about literacy and literacy qualities. So, but also as a tool that encourages social skills and soft skills as well, like collaboration and teamwork. When you create a comic, most of the times you have to find solutions to critical dilemmas, or, as I said earlier, empathy, because when you're reading a comic, you're stepping back and you're entering the world of other people, and you can see that there are other realities out there different from what you are experiencing. Or by creating a comic with a colleague, you can break down a million of stereotypes. And I have an example here. When we were doing comics workshop for local and refugee population, it was a mixed group of children, and there were two. They were working in pairs, and one pair, it was a Greek child and a child coming from Iran. So they sat down and they started discussing about the main character of the comic, and the child from Iran drew a woman and said, "This is, the main character of our story." And the woman has really beautiful hair, and she was wearing lipstick and a modern outfit. And the child from Greece asked, "But this is not the typical, image we have about the women coming from your country. We know that there were other types of clothes, so on and so forth." So a very organic dialogue and conversation started between those two kids, and they learned so much for the culture of one another, discussing of how a comic character would look like. So for me, that's an amazing example of how we can use comics for educational goals. And this is only one example out of millions that I can share.
Yeah, it's so true. A little while ago, we had Helen Jones on, an academic from England, and a lot of her work looks at children creating comics together and the kind of co-creation. And I became really interested. And that coincided alongside having a lot of pairs of people on the podcast, writer-illustrator pairs or writing duos. And I've become really interested in the collaborative side of comics through that, and through hearing people talk. And that's just another story which brings forward to my mind how powerful that can be. And I almost think that co-creating stories in comic form, it lends itself so much to it, because there's something almost easier. It's much easier to work on a drawing together and add to it and change it together, like, oh, and now I'm going to put this in the background and change the setting, or and then this, and build a story around an image, than it is if you were writing it, because you have to write it linearly if you're writing it down. But with an image, it seems much easier to kind of grow a story together. I don't know if I'm making sense in what I'm saying, but I definitely think there's something in that, the use of image and word together, that makes that collaboration more possible.
I totally agree.
When I think of the themes that come through across all the guests that we've had on the podcast, this community aspect of reading and sharing, and having a group of friends who all like the same characters or comics, or passing comics along through family members, or down the generations, even sometimes, of when people's first comic experience, sometimes they talk about it being a comic that their parent liked and passed down to them. And you've spoken about community today as well. You spoke about it earlier. You're involved in the Comicdom Festival. Can you tell us a little bit more about the events and the kind of community, I guess, that's built up around it?
Yeah, of course. So this is the festival that we started back in 2006. We had like the 18th version the past May. It's been growing to become like the biggest festival, comics festival in Greece right now. Every year we try to showcase the variety of the medium of comics and graphic novels. So the programming has always on the spotlight an original art exhibition. And we were very lucky all those years to have collaborated with amazing artists and organizations. We had the opportunity to bring to Athens and to the Greek audience original art by Charles Schulz, Will Eisner, Hergé, and so many other incredible artists.
When you see the original artwork, it is so, I find it so inspiring, and just being able to see like the pencil underneath and the edits and the changes.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. It's every time, I am unpacking an exhibition, I feel like intimidated and, overwhelmed about, the beauty of page, but also I'm super, scared because this is something very fragile, and I'm trying not to touch it. But yeah, every time it's amazing to see, to see the process, because most of the people say, okay, it's comics. Okay, you take like a piece of paper and a pen and you do some doodles, but when you see an original page, you understand that it's not only doodles. It has a lot of, many layers, both in terms of how you tell the story and also how you, deliver the story in an illustrated format. So we do have the original art exhibitions, and we also have always spotlight on a Greek artist or a collection of Greek artists. We have international guests, and again, the past years we try not to invite the big mainstream names, but mostly to handpick guests that have something interesting to share with the audiences, and that might be related with the way they work, or again, the messaging they want to convey through their work. For example, this year we had an amazing animator from Spain who is working on animations for human rights, and we did a very interesting workshop with refugee teenagers who created their own animation on the rights they believe, the human rights they believe are very important for them. And then we do have a big artist alley where we host lots of Greek artists who are, showing their work. We do have a retailers area with comic book stores and bookstores. And then we do have workshops, panel discussions, screenings, sketch events, a dedicated kids and family zone with activities for children.
Sounds incredible.
Very amazing and vibrant atmosphere. We do have, of course, a cosplay competition because, cosplay is huge everywhere in Greece as well. But it's amazing how, this community is growing every year. And the past year we have seen this change in our demographics, because the children that they were born when we were starting, people are now like teenagers able to come to the festival.
And have you noticed a wider range of people coming and starting to be involved in the scene, like a broader spectrum?
Yeah, of course. Every year that, we see that shift, and we see that, more people are coming, and from, totally different backgrounds and demographics. We have like families and teenagers. We have grandparents bringing their grandchildren. We have almost everything in the festival, which is very, very, yeah.
And for you, of all of those things that you've just spoken about, what are the kind of highlights? What are the things that you most enjoy, or is that too difficult to pick?
It is. But again, in everything that we are doing, I think that the most amazing thing every time is when you see the spark in the eyes of a person who is fascinated by something new they discover, and that new thing might be a new comic book or a page from the original art exhibition, or how amazed they are by themselves that they manage actually to create their own comic page. I mean, this is something that I really enjoy every time I see it, and I'm lucky because I see it often.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. I feel like I could talk to you for hours, but we are nearing the end of the podcast. If you've got a few takeouts or key points that you'd like to leave you've got so much experience in this area. A few key points that you'd like to leave us listeners thinking about.
Well, read comics.
Good one.
Yeah. Add more comics to your curriculum, to the libraries, to the educational and learning process. Don't be afraid, to make mistakes when you are trying to create your own comic page, because the failure gives you also a liberty to become more creative, enhance the storyteller that you have inside you, and search for and support the artists who are, offering us these amazing books.
Those are fantastic set of takeouts. Thank you. I really believe that everyone is a storyteller. We do it naturally all the time. We're just, when we're talking, family, friends, work, we're telling stories all the time. But to be able to get those down in a form where they can be shared more widely, and I think everyone can do that if they just carve out a little bit of space to allow that to happen. So at the end of the podcast, as I alluded to earlier, I asked guests to pick one book, comic or book about comics that we could add to our to be read pile. Now, I think this is going to be a challenge for you, but I'm going to make you do it. Can you tell us one book that we should put onto our list of things to read?
One. Mm-hmm. Okay. So again, I will share something that I just finished reading it, and it's the graphic novel called Dragon Hoops by Jean Yuen Yang. It's about sports, basketball, failures and wins, because it's autobiographical. It follows the story of Jean when he was a young boy and he wanted to play basketball, but he never actually managed to achieve it. And then he comes back to his own school as a teacher, as a coach to the school basketball team. And it's a very fascinating story where we can all find moments where we can engage and feel close to the main character. It's a book about optimism and, never giving up to your dreams. And even if your dreams do not be fulfilled in the way that you have imagined, it will somehow be fulfilled in another way. It's mostly addressed to teenagers and young audiences, but I really enjoyed reading it. And then, of course, you are motivated to go out and play some basketball. So
you've started your basketball career.
Yeah.
That sounds brilliant. I haven't heard of that at all, and I really enjoy sports and watching sport, so I think definitely that would appeal to me. It's not something that I've bought into, that sort of side interest is not something that I've bought into my comics reading much, which is weird. I don't know why I've kept those things separate in my life, so this might be a good moment to bring them together. So thank you very much for that recommendation, and thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. I've learned loads. I found it really fascinating, so thank you for coming on. I know it's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the knowledge that you've got, but it's been a brilliant starting point to learn from you today, so thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share and discuss and keep up the good work. The podcast is amazing.
Oh, thank you. There you have it. Great to speak to Lida and learn all about the work that's going on there in Athens to promote comics and the impact that it's had after dedicating so many years to it. It must be so satisfying to be able to see that really building up a head of steam, the growth and number of people, the variety, the diversity of people coming to those events, the number of new comics being produced. It all points to a really strong and exciting culture that's been developed by all of the work going on in Athens. So huge congratulations to Lida for that. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing a bit of a different perspective. It's great to be able to hear what's going on in other countries. And I was absolutely fascinated by some of the things you said, especially around how to involve children in kindergarten, preschool age children in the comics world and in storytelling with images. And I found that really fascinating, really leaned into so many of the things that I've been thinking about recently and gave me more avenues to explore. So thank you, Lida. That has been brilliant. An interesting pick. I thought I would follow on from Lida's pick with a sporting type graphic novel that I did, although I said in that episode that I haven't really brought those two elements of my life together, sports and graphic novels. I have got one, and this one I picked a few years ago. I did a virtual London marathon for National Literacy Trust to raise money, and I did a bookshop marathon, so I made a route running around as many indie bookshops as I could in London whilst doing the marathon distance. And I stopped and bought books as I went, and I stopped off at Gosh Comics. Of course I did. I had to stop off at Gosh Comics in London, and I bought a running-themed graphic novel by Jan Novak and Jaromir 99, Zatopek. The tagline is, "When you can't keep going, go faster." So this was going to pick this up about halfway, so it was about half marathon distance at this point. It's a powerful biographical portrait set against the backdrop of the Cold War. Zatopek sees Czech creators Jan Novak and Jaromir 99 explore the extraordinary career of a peerless distance runner, from his first meeting with his wife, fellow Olympian Dana Ingrova, to the record-breaking victories that would ensure his lasting legacy. The illustrations are done in a woodcut style. It's really graphic, limited colour palette, 4 colours, really, really interesting way that the artwork's been created, and a great story. And I love that it's a biography as well. So that's my recommendation for this week, linking into the sport theme that Lida started off there. Thank you so much for listening. As you know, this season of Comic Boom is sponsored by ALCS, the Authors Licensing and Collecting Society. I have been highlighting some resources each week, so do check out those on previous episodes if you haven't. But I'm not going to do that this week, because in the next episode of Comic Boom, we'll have a little mini section at the end where we get to talk to Barbara Hayes, who's CEO of ALCS. And it was a really interesting conversation, really pertinent, thinking about the impact of AI, which I know is such a hot topic among writers and illustrators, a lot of concerns around how to protect their rights in this technology. A really interesting conversation with Barbara about ALCS's work in that area and more generally. So that'll be a nice little section at the end of the main interview of the podcast. So keep listening for that one next week. As always, you can keep in touch with the podcast by following me on Twitter or X, which is at Lucy_Braidley, by following the podcast on Instagram at comic_boom_podcast. You can also just message us directly through the podcast website. Each episode has a message the podcast creator section where you can put a message in. We also love to see reviews. Write those 5-star reviews, share with your colleagues and your friends and your networks, because it's always great to have a personal recommendation for a podcast. I always really appreciate when people recommend a podcast to me, so that is a definite thing that we would really appreciate you doing. That's it for me today. You've been listening to Comic Boom, which is hosted and produced by me, Lucy Starbuck Braidley. Thanks for listening.